Yeah, thank you for your introduction. As Chris mentioned, I would like to speak today about spline representation of probability density function. And it's a joint work with many colleagues. Some of them you know, it's Hiba and Ivana. So I would like to, first of all, explain why density function needs a special structure. They are not so ordinary function in L2 space because of integral constraint. Integral over the domain must be equal to 1. It's also important that density function carry relative information. So it means that if we multiply the density by a positive constant and then normalize it, then the distributional structure remains the same. Also, it's important that we need a geometry that respects the relative nature. So this leads us to base space. Base space is in fact Hilbert space of non-negative functional compositions that have integrable square logarithm. Instead of classical counting and multiplication, we have operation called perturbation and powering, and of course we can define inner product by this expression. As you can see, these operations are not so convenient for computation. So this is the fact why we want to avoid the computation in base space. And for this reason, we use so-called CLR transformation to move from base space to L2 zero space. The CLR transformation is defined by this expression for a continuity function, which must be positive because of this logarithm. And the CLR transformation for density function means that the integral, which is in base space equal to 1, after CLR transformation is now equal to 0. We have, of course, inverse CLR transformation, which is in fact defined as an exponential of a function from L to 0 space, which is normalized to have integral equal to 1. Well, this is the way how we deal with densities. And from observation, we want to first of all construct histogram to have some points which we want to approximate. And what is question? How many bins is okay? This is the first question. The second question, which is very important, is what can we do if the frequencies is equal to 0? Because we can move from this data, I mean, the middle point of the bins and frequencies, corresponding frequencies, we move to this data from base space to L to 0 space. But for discrete CLR transformation, which is defined by this expression, we need, again, positive frequencies. So the question is how to deal with 0 frequencies. And there is an idea which is described in this paper that we can put instead of 0 some small positive values, but it makes some trouble in any way. Well, the story is very simple. We construct a histogram in base space, then we use discrete CLR transformation for data from histogram. So we have something like this, and it is given by this diagram. So from base space, we move by this data and by using CLR transformation to CLR transformed function, data of histogram. Then we use in L2 0 space some spline approximation, and then we can use inverse CLR transformation to move from L2 0 space by this spline to base space. Well, so as I mentioned, for the CLR transform histogram data, we want to find spline that minimizes penalized least square form, which we can see many times this week. But what is necessary to fulfill is the integral, which must be equal to 0. So we want to find spline which has this condition. And of course, there is a penalization term. We can use whatever we want. By penalization parameter, we can use again what we want, but it's necessary to, as I mentioned, fulfill this condition. Here is some basic choice of penalty. So as we mentioned during the week, we can use, of course, some L2 norm of L derivatives or some discrete variation. Well, so I am using a little bit different notation for splines than you, because I was studied the book by Dirk's spline approximation about curve approximation. So I'm using this notation for knots, but the idea is very similar. I am using the linear combination of B splines. What is important that to have all basis function, we need to add some additional knots, which have to satisfy this condition. And what is for us very important, that we are able to represent the zero integral constraint by a linear condition on knots and coefficients. And this is a linear condition on on coefficients. So if we put it together, we can rewrite the problem to find a vector of coefficients which minimizes the least penalized least square subject to this linear condition. So it means that we have, in fact, a quadratic problem with linear condition. So it's constraint optimization problem. And this way, how to deal with it, we described in this paper, which is 10 years old. Well, after this paper, we did some extension. We use weighted penalized least squares, where we incorporate variance covariance matrix sigma, which is now, because of zero integral and CLR transformation, positive semi-definite. So for weighting, we are not able to use its inverse, but we have to work with generalized inversion. As Hiba mentioned on Tuesday, we also work with orthogonalization. So we use Splinet and ZB Splinet, which I'm going to talk later. And of course, we work with functional densities for periodic boundary conditions. So it means that we work with circular density data. And of course, what is very important, that we are able to use the same process, use the same idea to bivariate density functions. So we use tensor product B-spline, and the zero integral constraint can be again written as a condition on B-spline coefficients, which now means that we have a matrix. So the matrix of coefficients must fulfill some linear condition. This was done in this paper. But there is a question if there is a possibility to find some basis function which fulfill the zero integral constraint. And Hiba introduced it to you on Tuesday, that we defined so-called ZB splines, which are in fact only derivation of classical B-spline. But what is very important for us, that the derivative has integral equal to zero. So as you can see on the left side by blue, there is a quadratic. On the right side, there is a cubic B-splines, and its derivative are linear and quadratic ZB splines, which have zero integral. So it means that we are able to construct B-spline, some basis function, we call them ZB splines, with integral equal to zero, that every linear combination fulfill the zero integral. So we use it then for approximation of density function. So as I mentioned, we use ZB spline, and we express the spline as a linear combination of ZB splines. So it means that immediately by this expression, the spline belongs to L2 zero space. But what is very important to say, that in this case, we have to have coincident additional knots. It's very important and necessary to fulfill the zero integral constraint. But with this ZB spline expression, we have unconstrained optimization problem, which is again penalized least squares. So it means that we want to find vector of coefficients for ZB spline representation, which minimizes this expression, and we don't need any other integral constraint. Yeah, here is a very simple example. So we have data from normal distribution. We did CLR transformation to move them to L2 space. Then we did spline approximation. So it means that we find spline that approximates this data and have integral equal to 0. Then we use inverse CLR transformation. And it means that we have finally the spline, which belongs to base space and have integral equal to 1. So the question is, if we have inverse CLR transformation for final spline, we can do it also for basis function. So it means that we can define so-called compositional B-splines, which are in fact inverse CLR transformation of ZB splines. And then we are able to represent the compositional spline in base space by perturbation and powering by this expression. Sorry. Yeah, so this approach leads us to use naturally basis function which have integral equal to 0, so we don't have to add some additional constraint. And we now want to use this idea for bivariate case. The very simple idea is used to tensor product ZB splines, but it's not enough because it's connected with dimension. So we have to add some extra function. And this is very similar to what Maria mentioned here on Wednesday, because we have tensor product functions and functions which are univariate. So it means that in the second variable, it's constant function. But again, I must say that we have to use the additional coincident nodes. And the dimension then is in fact equal to dimension of tensor product of classical B splines minus 1 because of integral 0 condition. So here you can see some examples on the up row. That here you can see the tensor product components, and here you can see the univariate components which are constant in the second variable. Yeah, so with this expression, it means that we want to find now in 2 dimensions bivariate splines, which minimizes, again, penalized least square. But we have, again, because we want to use ZB splines representation, we include the constraint on interval into the basis function. And we were able to describe this by coefficients, and we can solve it. This was recently published in this paper. And as I mentioned, the bivariate splines can be expressed by these 3 parts. So it means that we have tensor product basis function and corresponding matrix of coefficients. Then we have univariate basis function and corresponding vectors of coefficients. What is very important from this construction that we can get from this representation some decomposition. We did some decomposition of bivariate densities in the paper from 2024, where we use the previous approach. So it means that we incorporate the 0 integral constraint by coefficients. But what is important that we defined so-called independent and interactive part of densities, which are orthogonal. And we are also able to define marginals, which form the independent part of the densities. So this motivates us to find the composition by using ZB splines representation. And we can get it very easily because independent part is in fact formed by these two sum of univariate ZB splines function, and interactive is in fact made by the first part where we used tensor product ZB splines. And univariate CLR marginals are in fact the parts of the independent part. So we need to do some other decomposition because we have this I-dependent and interactive part immediately from the construction. What is very useful that we have the decomposition of spline and of independent part, interactive and independent part are orthogonal, and also marginals are orthogonal. So we have very nice Pythagorean identities, which means that all components can be analyzed separately. So the story is almost finished. So from histogram data, which we moved from base space to L2-0 space, we approximate them in L2-0 space by spline. We have, because when we use ZB splines, we have immediately the decomposition. We have interactive and independent part, and also from independent part, we have two marginals. And also we can do inverse CLR transformation on each part. So we have the opposite part in base space by using inverse CLR transformation. Well, here you can see some examples. The first row is in L2-0 space. The second row is in base space. In first column, you can see the whole density function in L2-0 in base space. The black dot are the histogram data. In the middle column, you can see the independent part, and here on the right side, you can see the interactive part. And as I mentioned, it's very convenient because we don't have to do some decomposition because we have it immediately from the construction. Well, now I would like to introduce you our current research. We motivated by this paper from 2023, where my colleagues deal with orthogonal decomposition of multivariate densities and with relationship with copula-based representation. And our work with ZB splines and with the representations is very nice, and I think it's very useful because we are able to extend it to multivariate case by using marginals, pairwise interactions, three order and high order interactions immediately, and we can have, of course, the decomposition, so we can deal with all parts separately and study the relationship between these parts. So this is the first project we are now working on. And the second project is connected with how to avoid the histogram, because I mentioned that when we work with histograms, we have some problems because there is a question, how many bins are okay, and how to deal with zero frequencies. So this is the story from observation. We did histograms, then we move by histogram data to, by using CLR transformation to L2-0. Then we do some approximation and move to base space. Now we are thinking about using ZB splines immediately in base space, try to avoid the histogram story. So it means that we use maximum likelihood idea. So from samples, we use ZB splines immediately to get spline representation in base space. So it means that we want to find, this is the expression for univariate case, but of course we can do it in two-dimension and multivariate case, of course. So it means that we want to minimize this expression, where the first part stands for maximum likelihood. The second part is for normalization part, and the last part, the third part, is of course some penalization. And again, we can use whatever we want as a penalty. So I think very useful because we avoid the histogram question, which is sometimes makes some trouble. And this approach is very convenient because we avoid the histogram. We have ZB spline representation, so we have decomposition, and we can deal with every part of the decomposition separately. And as I mentioned, we have, of course, possibility in 2-dimension and multi-dimensional how to deal with this by this idea. And that's all from my side. Thank you for your attention.